The first thing Elara noticed was the smell. Not roses, not the lavender her mother always arranged beside her bed, not even the faint cedar of her own bedroom wardrobe. This was something different. Something expensive and quiet, sandalwood perhaps, or a wood polished so long and so lovingly that it had begun to breathe on its own, and beneath it, the cold suggestion of stone, old stone, the kind that belonged to buildings that had stood for 200 years and intended to stand 200 more. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was not her ceiling. It was higher than any ceiling had a right to be arched and plastered in the old style, with a single chandelier hanging dark and cold above her, its crystals catching the grey morning light like frozen tears. Velvet curtains, deep navy, swallowed most of the windows. The furniture she could see was dark mahogany, carved and heavy, built for permanence. She sat up slowly. Her head did not hurt. She was grateful for that, at least, but her thoughts moved the way thoughts do when the mind is buying time before it has to face something cautiously, sideways, like a cat approaching an open door it is not certain it wants to walk through. Where am I? She pressed her palms flat against the sheets. They were the color of cream and felt like something that should not exist in a world that also had contained ordinary linen. She looked down at herself. She was still dressed in her day clothes from yesterday, though her boots had been removed and placed, quite neatly, beside the foot of the bed. Someone had cared enough to remove her boots. That detail frightened her more than anything else. She turned her head slowly toward the other side of the bed. He was there, a man, fully dressed as well, his dark coat still buttoned, his cravat slightly loosened at the throat, his dark hair swept back from a face that, even in sleep, wore the expression of someone who had not fully decided to stop being in charge of things. His jaw was sharp, his lashes were unfairly long. One hand rested flat against the pillow between them, fingers slightly curled, as though even unconscious he was ready to hold something. Elara did not breathe. She did not scream. She was proud of that. Later, she simply sat there, completely still, and allowed the full, terrible scope of her situation to settle over her like snow. It is 6:30 in the morning. I am supposed to be married at noon. I do not know this man. I do not know this room. I do not know this house. The man stirred. His eyes opened grey. She noted with the distant calm of someone already past shock, and they found her immediately. Not with alarm, not with confusion, with the measured, unhurried attention of a man who had, at some point in his life, trained himself never to be caught off guard. He looked at her, she looked at him, and then, with a composure that should have been criminal given the circumstances, he said, "You're awake." Elara stood up from that bed so fast, she nearly knocked herself sideways. "Who are you?" she said. It was not a question. It came out like a sentence waiting to be corrected. "Where am I? What is this place?" And what she stopped, pressed her hand briefly to her mouth, then removed it. "What exactly happened last night?" He sat up, slowly, unhurried in a way that made her want to throw something at him. "My name," he said, "is Crestwood, Lord Adrian Crestwood, Duke of Stirling." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. She felt the ripple move through her entire body. Because she knew that name. Every person in the 3 counties knew that name. The Duke of Stirling was not a man you encountered at parties. He was a man people spoke about in hushed tones over dinner. A man whose family had once held the financial fate of 6 noble houses in the palm of one hand. A man her father had spent the last 2 years quietly, methodically, trying to destroy. She stood at the foot of the bed of her family's most dangerous enemy, in a dress that had been worn yesterday, with 4.5 hours until her wedding, and she had absolutely no memory of how she had gotten there. Elara's name was Lady Elara Voss, and she had been, for most of her 23 years, the kind of woman who planned things. She planned her mornings with military precision. She planned her conversations before she entered the rooms. She planned what she would say, what she would not say, and most importantly, she planned what she would feel, and when, And for how long? She had not planned this. She moved to the window and pulled back one edge of the velvet curtain. The estate that spread below her was immense and severely manicured lawns that ran all the way to a tree line. A gravel drive that curved in a long, elegant arc. A fountain that was not running yet, because it was too early and too cold. She recognized none of it. Stirling Park. He brought me to Stirling Park. She let the curtain fall. When she turned around, the Duke had risen and was standing near the cold fireplace, watching her with those grey eyes that gave nothing away. He was taller than she had expected, broad through the shoulder in the way that suggested he had actually used his body for something at some point, not simply inherited good posture. He wore a dark Victorian frock coat, well cut, almost severe, the kind of clothing that said, "I am not trying to impress anyone," which, of course, was itself impressive. There was a faint shadow of exhaustion under his eyes, and his cravat was still slightly loose, as though he had been up most of the night and had not bothered to repair himself before she woke. "Before you say anything," he said, "allow me to be clear about several things. You," she said, "are not in a position to set the terms of this conversation." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, recalled from somewhere far away. "I am the Duke of Stirling," he said. "I am always in a position to set the terms. And I," she said, "am the woman who is getting married in 4 hours and is currently standing in your bedroom for reasons I cannot explain. So I suggest you start explaining to them, Your Grace, before I walk out of this house and make a scene so spectacular that it follows your family for the next 3 generations." The ghost of the smile disappeared. He studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the writing desk near the window, opened a drawer, and removed a folded letter. He held it out to her. She crossed the room and took it. The handwriting on the outside was familiar. She would have known it anywhere. It was the precise, slightly old-fashioned script of her godmother, Lady Wren, who had been her mother's closest friend, who had attended every important occasion in Elara's life, and who had died, or was supposed to have died, 11 months ago. Elara's hands went very still. She unfolded the letter. "My dear girl, if you are reading this, then you are safe, which is all that matters. There is much I was not able to tell you, while there were ears in every room. Trust the Duke. I know what I am asking. Trust him anyway. The marriage your father has arranged is not what it appears to be, and by the time you walk down that aisle, it will be too late to undo what he has done. You have one morning to change the course of everything. Do not waste it being angry with the wrong person." W. Elara read the letter twice. Then she folded it back along its crease lines and held it at her side. She did not look at the Duke yet. She looked at the floor instead, at the deep burgundy of the Persian rug beneath her boots, and she breathed very slowly through her nose. "Lady Wren is alive. Lady Wren brought me here, and she told me to trust him." She looked up. "How long have you known her?" she asked. The Duke's expression shifted barely, but enough. "Since before you were born," he said. They sat on opposite ends of a long settee near the window, a low table between them with 2 cups of tea that neither of them drank. The Duke explained in the measured, careful way of someone who had rehearsed this. Lady Wren had not died. She had staged her death when she discovered, quite by accident, that Elara's father, Lord Voss, had been systematically dismantling the Duke's financial holdings through a network of false accounts and forged agreements, and that he planned to complete his scheme by marrying Elara to a man named Lord Harwick, a man who was, in fact, not simply a suitor, but a business partner in everything her father was doing. "Harwick will have access to your trust," the Duke said. "Your mother's inheritance, the portion that passes to you directly upon marriage, will have legal control of it within 6 months. Your father's debts will be settled, his involvement in the fraud will be buried, and you will be left with a husband who needs your money more than he needs you." Elara absorbed all of this the way you absorb very cold water in one full-body shock, and then a strange steadying afterward. "And you," she said, "what do you want from this?" "Evidence," he said. "Your father has documents, a ledger, and correspondence. Evidence that would clear my family's name and expose exactly what he has done. It is inside your father's house. I have not been able to get near it, but you," he paused, "can. You want me to steal documents from my own father. I want you to retrieve the truth," he said, "which your father stole first." She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He did not attempt to soften it. He did not apologize for asking for it. He simply waited, with the patience of a man who understood that the weight of what he was proposing needed a moment to settle. He is not a good man in the soft and comfortable sense. He is something harder than that. But hard things can be honest, and she was beginning to suspect, dangerously, that this one was. "I need to get back before the house wakes," she said. "If anyone notices I was gone, my carriage is already waiting," he said. "Of course it is," she said. She slipped back into Voss House, through the garden entrance at 7:20, before the kitchen maids had finished laying breakfast, and before her father had descended from his rooms. The house was dressed for a wedding. That was the first thing she noticed, the flowers everywhere. White and cream arrangements on every surface, on the landing, in the hall, along the banister of the main staircase. The smell of them was almost aggressive. Lilies, mostly. Harwick's choice. She had not been consulted. She had not been consulted about much. Her maid, Clara, met her at the top of the servants' stairs with the quiet, loyal efficiency of someone who had known Elara since she was a child and had therefore seen worse. "You're cold," Clara said, pressing her hands briefly. "Come and dress. Your mother has been asking for you since 6. "Tell her I went for air," Elara said. "She'll believe it. She will worry about it. She always worries about everything. It's one of the most consistent things about her." Clara drew a breath, as though she wanted to say something, and then chose not to, which meant she agreed. Elara's mother, Lady Voss, née Alderton, was a woman who had married well, and spent the years since learning the cost of that. She was not unkind. She was not unintelligent. She was simply a woman who had, at some critical fork in the road, chosen comfort over clarity, and had been walking that particular path ever since, in shoes that had never quite fit. She was in Elara's bedroom when Elara arrived, seated near the dressing table, holding a handkerchief she had not yet needed, and looking like she was waiting to need it. "There you are," she said. "I was beginning to... I'm here. Mama, your dress is ready." The seamstress came early to press it. "It's beautiful, Elara. It really is. I'm sure." Her mother paused, looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who had watched her daughter for 23 years and had learned to read the small signals. "Are you all right?" she asked. Elara sat down at the dressing table and picked up her hairbrush. "I'm fine, Mama. Just nervous." "Isn't that what brides are supposed to be?" Her mother smiled a small, slightly sad smile that Elara tucked away in the back of her mind to think about later. "Yes," she said. "I suppose it is." Elara had 2 hours before she had to be dressed and in the receiving room. She used them carefully. Her father's study was on the first floor, at the end of the east wing, a room she had been permitted to enter exactly twice in her life, both times as a child, both times briefly, both times supervised. It was his private kingdom. Even the servants cleaned it under his watch. She walked past the door twice before she went in. The third time, she turned the handle. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, a vast desk at the center, a fireplace that had been lit earlier and was still warm. She moved to the desk first, methodically, as she always was, starting with the left drawer. Bills, correspondence about the wedding. A letter from Harwick's solicitor. She set that aside and kept it, because it mentioned financial terms in language that confirmed everything the Duke had described. The ledger took another 10 minutes. It was behind the false back of the bottom right drawer, inside a leather case that had been pushed against the inner panel. She almost did not find it. She found it only because she pressed the panel the way she had once, as a girl, pressed the panel in her own dresser, and discovered a hidden shelf. Her hands were perfectly steady when she lifted it out. She was somewhat surprised by that. She opened it. The names were all there. The false accounts, the forged signatures including several that bore the Duke's family crest, clearly added later, clearly added by someone who had access to the original documents and the patience to copy a seal. Her father's hand appeared throughout, in notes beside the figures, in corrections, in initials that signed off on transfers that should never have happened. He built this carefully. Over the years, he was thorough. He never imagined that someone would look. She closed the ledger, placed it inside the front of her dressing gown, closed the drawer, left the room, closed the door. She walked back to her bedroom, with the expression of a woman thinking about nothing in particular. Her heart was hammering the entire way. She spotted him during the second hour of the wedding preparations, the social hour, when family and distant acquaintances gathered in the morning rooms to drink light wine and pretend the day was about something other than business. The Duke was dressed differently than he had been that morning. He had changed into the particular uniform of the comfortable English gentleman, dark coat, understated waistcoat, cravat tied with a precision that suggested he had done it himself and had no patience for assistance. He was standing near the fireplace, with a glass of something he was not drinking, and he was speaking to Alara's uncle, her father's youngest brother, a genial, slightly soft man who knew nothing about anything and was therefore the perfect cover. He had introduced himself, she learned later, as a relation of the groom, a distant one. Nobody had thought to question it, because nobody thought to question a man who looked like that in a room, like this. He was very good at seeming to belong everywhere. She made her way to the far end of the room, to the window that looked out onto the east garden, and waited. It took him 7 minutes to disengage from her uncle and cross to her side. She counted. "You found something," he said. He did not look at her directly. He looked out the window, as she did, at the garden below. A ledger. A letter from Harwick's solicitor, with enough financial language in it to establish the arrangement clearly. She kept her voice conversational, light. A bride chatting with a guest. "I have them upstairs. Can you get them to me before the ceremony? That depends on whether you have a plan for what to do with them after." He was quiet for a moment. "There will be men here," he said. "People I trust. If the documents exist, and say what I believe they say, we end this today, at the ball tonight." "Tonight," she said. "You mean at my own wedding celebration? I mean, before your marriage can be recorded, before it becomes a legal fact that cannot be undone." She turned her head slightly and looked at his profile. He had the face of a man who had not slept much. Lines of tension around his jaw that were not there from age but from something held in for too long. His hands were still on the windowsill, and she noticed that the knuckles were slightly white. He is not as calm as he appears. He is simply very practiced at appearing calm. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly, "I lose everything. My home, my standing, my family's name, everything." "I know," he said. He did not offer her false comfort. He did not tell her it would be all right. She respected that. "Then it cannot go wrong," she said. He turned his head and looked at her for the first time since he had arrived at her side. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, but enough. "No," he said, "it cannot." Lord Harwick found her 40 minutes later, in the corridor outside the morning room. He was a man of medium height and narrow shoulders, dressed in the dark, severe tones of a man who had confused seriousness with importance. He was older than Alara by 15 years, with the kind of handsome face that had once been striking and had since grown impatient. He held a document, she could see the edge of it, in his inner coat pocket, and he looked at her with eyes that were already calculating. "I understand you were not in your room this morning," he said. "Not, 'Good morning.' Not, 'How are you?' Not even a pretense of the warmth a man might offer his bride on the morning of their wedding." Alara smiled at him. "I needed air," she said. "I always need air when I'm anxious." "You should have informed someone." I did not realize I required permission for a morning walk. His eyes narrowed slightly. After today, he said, certain things will be expected. She kept the smile exactly where it was. After today, she said pleasantly, a great many things will be different. He left. She watched him go. He knows something is wrong. He does not know what. Good. Uncertainty is a gift. Use it. The formal gardens behind Voss House were the kind that required armies of gardeners to maintain the illusion of naturalness. Gravel paths, curved through low hedges, a stone bench sat near the rose garden, a small fountain, an elderly stone cherub Elara had always found slightly unsettling, trickled in the center of the main walkway. She found him there at 3 in the afternoon, during the hour when the guests retired to their rooms, and the house held its breath between morning and evening. He was sitting on the stone bench. He was not doing anything, not reading, not writing, not performing any of the usual activities of a man who did not want to be caught sitting alone in someone else's garden. He was simply sitting, with his coat off, and folded on the bench beside him, looking at the fountain. She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, the folded coat between them. For a while, neither of them said anything. It was a strange kind of quiet, not empty, but full of the things that needed to be said and had not been yet, and the things that perhaps did not need to be said at all but were present anyway, taking up space. Tell me something true, she said finally. He looked at her. That is a broad request. Then narrow it however you like. He was quiet for a moment. I have been watching your family for 2 years, he said, trying to find the evidence, trying to find a way in. I had almost given up when Lady Wren contacted me. He paused. She told me that if I wanted the truth, I needed to stop looking at your father and start looking at you. She said that? She said you were the only honest person in that house, and that honesty, given the right circumstances, would do what cleverness alone could not. Elara looked at the fountain. Lady Wren always saw more than she let on. Even when you were 10 years old, and she was watching you read, you had the feeling she was taking notes. She was always very certain about things, Elara said. She was right about you. The words were simple, matter of fact. He said them the way he said most things, without decoration, without effort, as if they were simply accurate statements of observable fact. That, she was beginning to realize, was somehow more affecting than if he had tried to make them beautiful. You don't know me, she said. No, he agreed, but I have been paying attention. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The afternoon light was doing something unfair to his face, catching the gray of his eyes, making them warmer than they had been that morning. He was not trying to be charming. He was not performing anything for her. He simply was what he was, sitting on a garden bench in his waistcoat with his coat folded beside him, a man carrying a weight so long he had probably forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. Be careful, she told herself. This is not the time to feel things. But feeling things, as she was beginning to remember, did not have a great deal of respect for timing. My mother loved this garden, she said. It came out unexpectedly, before things changed. She used to bring me here in the evenings. She would tell me the names of everything, every flower, every variety of stone in the fountain, the Latin names for the hedges. She had a mind like a she stopped. Like what? Like a library, the kind that is always open. He did not say, that must have been lovely. He did not say, I am sorry things changed. He said, she sounds like someone worth protecting. Elara nodded slowly. Yes, she said. She is. She stood up, smoothed her skirt. The afternoon light was shifting, warning her that time was not standing still, even if she wished it would. Tonight, she said, I will need you to be ready at the moment I create the opening. Not before, not after, at the moment. I understand. And if things go wrong, they will not. She looked at him for one more second. He believes it. She was not sure if that made her feel better or simply more aware of how much she was beginning to want him to be right. She walked back toward the house. He did not watch her go. She would have known if he had. She felt herself hoping that he had anyway. Evening came in the way it does in houses preparing for grand events, not gently, but in a rush of lamplight and noise, and the sudden activity of servants who had been doing quiet work all day, suddenly doing visible work everywhere, at once. The wedding ball was scheduled to begin at 8, the ceremony itself a private matter, with only the nearest family present set for 9, in the small chapel at the east end of the property that her grandfather had built and that nobody used for anything else. Elara dressed alone. She had asked Clara to help with the buttons and then sent her away. She sat at the dressing table and looked at herself. The dress was ivory, with lace at the throat and wrists in the old style, high-collared and precise. It had been chosen by someone she was not certain now whether it had been her own choice or a choice she had been steered into because it looked exactly like what an obedient, traditional daughter would wear when she was handed from one man's authority to another's. She looked at the woman in the mirror. You have the ledger, you have the letter, you have a plan, and a man who claims to have people in position. You also have approximately 2 hours. Do not waste them being afraid. Fear is information. Use it. She opened the dressing table drawer and removed the ledger and the solicitor's letter. She wrapped them both inside the silk shawl she planned to carry that evening, an ivory silk shawl that matched the dress precisely, because she had planned ahead for exactly this. She went downstairs to the ball. The house had transformed. The main rooms on the ground floor had been thrown open, the furniture rearranged or removed to create space. The candlelight multiplied until the rooms glowed amber and warm and slightly unreal. Music was already playing a string quartet in the corner of the largest room, precise and lovely, and completely indifferent to the fact that something terrible was about to be either prevented or committed, depending on how the next 2 hours went. She moved through the rooms with the practiced ease of a woman raised to do exactly this. She greeted me. She smiled. She accepted champagne and did not drink it. She spoke to her father's business associates, to her mother's friends, to the young women she had grown up beside and barely knew anymore. She did all of this with the automatic fluency of someone who had performed this particular social dance so many times that her body knew the steps, even when her mind was somewhere else entirely. Her mind was watching. She found the Duke near the back of the second room. He had changed into the formal dress of the evening black coat, white waistcoat, everything precise and severe, in the way that formal dress always made severe men look more severe, and ordinary men look like they were wearing a costume. He was not wearing a costume. They exchanged no words. She passed close enough to him to transfer the shawl a single moment, smooth and unremarkable as a brushed shoulder, and kept walking. His fingers closed around it without breaking his conversation. She moved on. Lord Harwick found her near the champagne table at 8:20. His eyes were bright in a way that was not warm. His jaw was set. He had been told something, or suspected something, and the not knowing had wound him tight as a watch spring. It's nearly time, he said, taking her arm, not a romantic gesture, a managing one. We have 40 minutes, she said. I prefer to be prepared. She allowed him to lead her toward the east corridor. She noted as she went that the Duke had moved toward her father's private study. Good. The timing had to hold. Harwick kept her in the east corridor, speaking about arrangements for after, expectations for the first months, practical matters described in the flat tones of a man who viewed a marriage as a logistical exercise. She listened with half her attention and watched the door at the end of the hall with the other half. She needed to get to her father's study. The Duke would have the documents, but she needed to be there when he presented them. She was the one who could confirm, in person, where they had been found and how. She was the witness. Without her, a duke making accusations at another man's wedding ball was just a duke making accusations. With her, it was evidence. The trouble was Harwick. He had not let go of her arm. He was not touching her in a way anyone watching would have called inappropriate. He was simply holding on, with the specific pressure of a man who was not going to release what he considered to be already his. He knows, or he suspects. He is not going to let her walk away on her own initiative, so make it his initiative. "I find," she said, in the tone of a woman sharing a slightly embarrassing confession, "that I am more nervous than I expected. I think I need a moment. Could you find me some water? The champagne is making my head swim a little." He looked at her. She kept her expression mild, slightly apologetic, precisely calibrated to land at the intersection of brides being delicately overwhelmed. He released her arm. "I'll have someone bring it," he said. "Oh, please. Yourself. I'd feel better knowing it came from you." She added a small, trusting smile. The small, trusting smile was the thing that worked. He left. She moved. She had to cross 2 rooms and a corridor. Moving against the flow of guests migrating towards supper, she moved with the calm, purpose-light efficiency of a woman on her way to somewhere completely ordinary. She reached the study door. She pressed her hand against it. Inside, she could hear voices. She recognized the Duke's low, controlled, that particular texture of contained tension. She recognized her father's too high, sharper voice of a man who is frightened and is making anger stand in for it. She opened the door. The scene inside was this. Her father stood behind his desk. He was a man of 60, upright and grey-haired, with the particular bearing of someone who had been important long enough to have forgotten there was a time when he was not. His face, right now, was the color of old plaster. The Duke stood to the left of the desk. He had the ledger open in one hand and the solicitor's letter in the other, and 3 other men stood behind him. Men Alara did not know by name, but who carried themselves with the quiet, certain presence of legal authority. Her father saw her enter. Something moved across his face quickly, too quickly to name, but she caught it. It was not anger. It was not horror. It was grief. He knows that I know. And some part of him, some small, buried part, has been waiting for this. She walked to the center of the room and stood equidistant between the 2 men. "Papa," she said. Her voice was steady. "Elara." He was not. "I found the ledger in your study this morning," she said. "I want you to know, it was me, not him." She looked at the Duke briefly. He held her gaze and gave the smallest possible nod. The Duke did not steal it, she continued, looking back at her father. "I gave it to him because what is in it is a crime against his family and against me, and I will not stand in a chapel tonight and allow it to be buried by a marriage that was designed to bury it." Her father closed his eyes. He looked, suddenly, very old. "Elara," he said again. "Just her name. Just that." "Tell me why, Papa." Her voice was quieter now. "Not the how. I understand how. Tell me why." The room was completely still. He opened his eyes. "I had debts," he said finally. "That was not that." He stopped. "I made choices that seemed small at the time, and then I had to make larger choices to protect the small ones. And then there was no going back," she said. "There was never any going back," he said. The grief in his face was real. She held on to that, for later, for when she would need to decide how she felt about it. Right now there was no time for grief, because the door behind her opened, and Harwick walked in with a glass of water and an expression that crossed, in the space of 1 second, from expectation to comprehension to fury. Harwick set the glass down on the nearest surface, with a controlled, particular care that was more frightening than if he had thrown it. "Get out," he said, to the men standing with the Duke. "That will not be happening," one of them said. Harwick looked at Elara. "You have made a very serious mistake," he said. He said it quietly, which was worse. "No," she said. "I have corrected one." He took a step toward her. He did not take a second one. The Duke moved between them, in the particular way that large, calm men move when they have decided that something has gone far enough and would now like it to stop, not with drama, not with a speech, but with the simple physical fact of his presence, placed between Harwick and Elara like a door that had been closed. "Step back," the Duke said. There were only 2 words in it. They did not need any more. Harwick stopped. He looked at the Duke. The Duke looked back at him. Something was said. In that regard, that needed no translation. Harwick then looked at Elara's father. "Do you understand?" Harwick said, with a tightness in his voice like cloth about to tear. "What have you allowed to happen here? What has she cost us?" Elara's father said nothing. "All of it," Harwick continued, and there was something unraveling in him now, something that had been pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way. "All of it 2 years, and you let this... Enough." It was the Duke. "The documents are signed for. The men behind me have authority of record. This conversation is now being noted. Anything further that you say will be noted also." Harwick went very still, and then, in the way that certain men, when stripped of every other leverage, fall back on the only currency they believe always works, he turns to Elara. "If you do this," he said, "there is no version of your life that recovers. No man of standing will touch you. Your family's name, my family's name," she said, "is not yours to hold over me, and a life of standing that depends on my silence is not a life I want." She held his gaze until he looked away. That was when she knew it was over. Not the legal part that would take months, paperwork, formal proceedings, but the power of it, the sense that he held anything she needed. That was finished. There was a moment, after the legal men moved to formally take Harwick's document, and her father was led from the room, not arrested, but instructed to remain on the property and consult no one until morning, when the study was suddenly very quiet. Elara stood near the window. The garden was dark below, the stone cherub in the fountain, invisible in the evening. The music had stopped. She could hear, distantly, the confused murmur of guests who had been informed that the ceremony would be delayed. The Duke was standing near the desk, his hands at his sides. He was not looking at the documents. He was looking at her. "Are you all right?" he said. She considered this seriously, which was perhaps not what he expected. "I am not sure yet," she said. "Ask me again in a week." "I will," he said. She looked at him. "That is a promise, Your Grace," she said. "I know," he said. "There is a particular cruelty in a wedding that does not happen. The deflation of it, the embarrassment for everyone present, the long walk to their carriages with no celebration to cushion the disappointment." Elara was aware of this. She was aware of the whispers that had begun in the main hall, of the pointed questions being deflected by her mother, with the glassy, determined grace of a woman performing the social equivalent of standing in front of a broken dam. She had to go back out there. She knew she did. She was composing herself in the corridor outside the study when the Duke found her. He had straightened his coat. His expression had returned to the controlled, guarded thing it usually was, but there was something different in it now. Something that had not been there this morning. "There is something you should know," he said. "There are approximately 40 things I should know," she said. "Be specific." "My family's solicitor is here. He has reviewed the documents. The evidence is sufficient to formally restore my family's holdings and to clear the record of the accusations made against us." He paused. "As of tonight, the Duke of Stirling has no legal grievance outstanding." She studied him. "That is good news," she said. "It is," he said. "It also means I have no practical reason to remain involved with your situation. Any further obligation I claimed, on the basis of shared interest, is now resolved." She was very quiet for a moment. "He is telling me that he is free, that his part of the bargain is complete. He is telling me this," she realized, "so that anything he says next is not shaped by necessity." "I see," she said carefully. "I want to be clear," he said, with the weighted care of a man who has chosen each word before he speaks it, "that what I am about to say has nothing to do with strategy, or alliance, or any practical advantage. Go on." "I would like to call on you," he said. When things have settled, if that is something you would be willing to consider. She looked at him for a long time. The corridor was quiet. The music had not resumed. Somewhere in the house, her mother was managing 40 confused guests with nothing but composure and force of habit. He is not offering her safety. He is not offering rescue. He is asking, as plainly as a man like him knows how to ask, for a beginning. And she thought, that is enough. That is, perhaps, exactly enough. You may call on me, she said. But I warn you, I am not a simple woman. I know, he said. Something in his face shifted, warm and unexpected, like light through a window you did not realize was open. I have been paying attention, remember? She looked at him one more moment. Then she turned toward the main hall. Come then, she said. There are 40 guests who need an explanation, and I would rather not face them alone. He fell into step beside her without another word. It felt, she thought, like the beginning of a much longer conversation. The legal proceedings moved with the steady, unhurried pace of institutions that have existed long enough to know that truth does not require urgency to be true. The documents were examined, witnesses were interviewed, her father's solicitor resigned. Harwick left the county and did not return. Her father did not speak to her for the first 10 days. On the 11th day, he sent her a note. It said, I am sorry. I did not know how to stop. I should have found a way. It was the truest thing he had said to her in years. She wrote back. She said, I know. We will need time. But there is time. She believed it when she wrote it. That was something. Her mother recovered with the particular efficiency of women who have survived by adapting. She rearranged the house. She quietly cancelled the wedding flowers, donated them to a church, and never mentioned lilies again. She resumed her evening walk in the garden and told Elara, in passing, the Latin name for the new rose variety she had planted. It was the most like herself she had been in years. Lady Wren arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a plain carriage, with no crest on the door. She was smaller than Elara remembered, or perhaps she had grown. But her eyes were the same sharp and warm, and took everything in at once. They sat in the garden. It was a cool day, but pleasant. You are not angry with me, Wren said. It was not quite a question. I was, Elara said, for about 3 days. And then I ran out of anger, and found mostly gratitude underneath. That is a graceful way to put it. It is an honest way. Elara said, I think you taught me that. Being honest is more useful than being graceful. Lady Wren smiled. I taught you many things. Some of them were even intentional. The Duke called on her on a Thursday. He arrived without announcement, which she had come to expect from him. He came with a single orchid cream-white, formal, slightly absurd, the kind of gesture that said, I have been thinking about what one brings, and have not entirely resolved the question, and she received him in the sitting room and did not mention the orchid, and placed it in the window where it caught the light. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the investigation, not about strategy or evidence, or the formal outcome of proceedings. They talked about books she had strong opinions about, and so did he, and they disagreed about at least 3 authors with a warmth that felt like it had been waiting to happen for a long time. They talked about travel. He had been to places she had only read about. She told him what she had read, and he told her what the books had gotten wrong, and they were both entertained by the difference. When he left, he paused in the doorway. Thursday, he said, next week, if you're willing. I'll be here, she said. He nodded, put on his hat. I walked out in the afternoon. It was, she thought, the simplest thing he had ever said to her, and also the best. What she carried from all of it, what she turned over in the quiet evenings, when the house was settling and the day was done, was not triumph. Triumph was too loud for what this felt like. What it felt like was the sensation of having finally set down a weight she had carried so long she had stopped noticing it was heavy. She had spent her entire adult life being planned for, arranged, managed, directed by her father, by society, by the slow machinery of expectation, that decided what a woman of her position was supposed to want, and when she was supposed to want it. One morning, in a stranger's house, with no memory and no plan, she had simply chosen. She had chosen to look, to ask, to act, to refuse. And everything that followed, the difficulty of it, the fear of it, the loss and the cost, and the slow, hard rebuilding, all of it came from that one choice. Made in a room she had not planned to be in, beside a man she had not planned to meet. Life, she had decided, was not the thing you planned. It was what happened when the plan failed, and whether, in that unexpected space, you had the courage to build something true. She had had the courage. That was not nothing. That was, she thought, sitting in her garden on a Thursday afternoon, with the sunlight doing something lovely to the hedges, and an orchid in the window of the Keller sitting room that was, in fact, everything. This story was never just about a wedding morning that went sideways. It was about a woman who had so thoroughly arranged her choices before she could make them, her future constructed around someone else's need, that she had almost stopped believing she had the right to want something different. It takes a certain kind of courage to refuse the life that was built for you. Not because life is necessarily terrible, but because saying no means accepting uncertainty. Saying no means there is a moment, sometimes a very long moment, where you have nothing certain to hold on to. Elara held on to herself. That is the lesson, if there is one. You can lose a plan, a name, a title, a future that seems certain. You can lose almost everything that was arranged around you. But who you are, the honest, clear-eyed, courageous core of you, nobody can take that. Nobody can forge that signature. Nobody can bury that ledger. Protect it. Know it. Use it. And if you ever find yourself waking up in circumstances you did not plan, in a room you don't recognize, beside someone unexpected, with the old life falling away behind you, and nothing clear ahead, remember that the best things rarely began with a plan. They began with a choice. Subscribe to see how this unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going.